Please give it up for Kylee Wiscombe.
So a few years ago, my husband and I were preparing for a race. And if you've been to a race before, we were running a half marathon, the very first thing that you have to do is get in line for the porta potty. And so it's highly important. So the two of us are waiting in these very long lines, and the way the lines worked is there was, one line for 3 different porta potties. And I was just waiting. There happened to be 2 of them that had the red occupied sign, and there was another one that had the vacant. And I kept watching, and no one was going into that one, and I started asking, is anyone in that one? So I decided to go on, and I thought there was no one in there, and there seemed to be something back here saying, knock first, but I didn't really hear that part. So I walked up to the door, and I ripped it open, and there's this woman standing there in her full glory. And to make matters worse, this was my reaction. And I think this was her reaction. And actually, my husband and I were speaking about this today, and he was reminding me about how annoyed he was at me because he was trying to tell me to knock first. But I think she said something like this. Really? Really? You just go up and rip it open, and then you scream your head off? And this is what I said when I was actually diagnosed bipolar. I was actually really appalled that Miles would suggest that I was bipolar, because isn't that crazy, people? So as a natural-born achiever, it seemed like I was an unlikely candidate. I have a bachelor's in accounting and a master's. I was a top 10 scholar. I was a really motivated wife and mother, and all of a sudden, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder, not very good at the clicker thing so far. Okay, working on it. So bipolar disorder was originally called manic depressive illness, and it's a mental order characterized by periods of elevated mood and depression. I thought you might like to see my bipolar disorder. I think that there's about 300 different shades of bipolar, and this is something I learned after I was diagnosed. I like to think of mine as fuchsia. Other people might call theirs gray. So on this axis, this is my mood, and it goes from 0 to 10 is, on this side is what we would call hypomanic, and the 0 is, a normal mood, and then below is depressed. And up until I was 33 years old, I was very positive, just a very positive, uplifted person, and I didn't really struggle with depression. And you'll see that there's a couple of points here where there'd just be a little, increase in my mood, and I just called that when I was high on life. I just might need to wrap a couple extra Christmas presents, and everyone else is going to bed. Or my mother would ask me, "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" And I'd say, "Mom, I haven't even had a drink. I'm just high on life." So going along after my second baby, I started seeing a rise in my mood right here. And what it looked like is really productive, great ideas, but nonstop energy, sleepless nights. I thought it was great. My husband, on the other hand, started feeling, he started seeing that impact our family. And pretty soon, it wasn't just a high. It started going down to a low, and there would be days that I couldn't get out of bed. And then it would go back up, and I would be great. And then the next day, I couldn't get out of bed to take my kids to school. Finally, when I was diagnosed, I started the medication process, and I was in a very deep depression for about 8 months during that process. And then you'll see that I had, down here is where I was just very chronically depressed, and then I had a major manic episode, medication-induced, and I was hospitalized. Since then, I've been properly taking my medication, and the ups and downs are not nearly what they used to be. So before I was diagnosed, anyone who knows me knows that I believe that you can be happy. If you want to be happy, you can just choose to be happy. And this was my mindset. I really thought that it was your happiness was based on, what you were thinking at the time. People are just as happy as they make up their minds to be. I think that's true to an extent, but I think someone that says this hasn't experienced depression. This is me. Right here, this is what people think someone with depression feels like, just sad. But in fact, you can see right here, this is what I actually feel like. During my very deep depression, I mostly felt nothing. I felt numb. People told me that there was no longer a sparkle in my eyes. I felt sad. I felt self-loathing. Why am I feeling this way? What is wrong with me? I used to be such a good wife and a mother. I'm terrible. I felt hopeless. You feel like you're never going to get out of that pit when you're in it. And anxiety, I would have anxiety over making something as simple as, what am I going to make my kids for dinner? It became this overwhelming task. I had such guilt that I was a terrible wife. I was a terrible mother. My husband was having to take care of me, and I isolated. I pulled back and I hid from everyone. If you called me, I would auto-sack your call. I wouldn't text you back. So I really love this. What I wanted to do tonight is at least bring you 3 things that could really help. And I love this chart right here. Are you happy? Yes. Well, by all means, keep doing what you're doing. But no, do you want to be happy? Nah. Well, just keep doing what you're doing. Or yes, then change something. Miles promised me that if we kept changing something, that it would be temporary, that the depression wouldn't last forever. I felt like it was never going to end, but he promised me that if one thing didn't work, we would try another, and if one thing didn't work, we would try another. And he was right. So I wanted to leave you with 3 things that I did in my journey that helped. There are hundreds of things that you can do to help with depression. These are just 3 things that helped me. 1,000 gifts. The first thing I did was sought out help. So I went to a counselor, and it was really hard to experience joy for me during that time. I showed you that you just feel numb. And I've been told that gratitude is what helps you experience joy. And yet, I had such a hard time just being overall grateful. And so there's a book called 1,000 Gifts by Ann Voskamp. And what it is it's a woman that wrote down 1,000 things that she was grateful for, because through gratitude you find joy. So I began writing down my list of 1,000 things that I was grateful for. And what happened is when I was in that deep, dark place, when I just felt nothing, I would go back to those 1,000 lists and reread it and remember what I was grateful for. So some of the things that I'm grateful for was 1, Bryson's long eyelashes. 2, licking the frosting off of egg beaters. 3, Mrs. Richardson's caramel butter sauce. 4, light shining through picket fences. 5, roly-polies. It was just tiny things, just little things that I could look back through and remember, yeah, that little thing, that brought me some happiness. The second thing is I went to the counselor again when I was experiencing suicidal thoughts. There were these thoughts that when I would see a knife, I would think, what would happen if that knife slipped? Or when I was driving, I would think, just what would happen if I turned into that oncoming traffic? There were these terrible thoughts, and they haunted me constantly. And I didn't know what to do about them, so I went to a counselor and told her, this is what's happening. And she asked me a question. She said, is it the truth that you want to die? And I said, no, I don't want to die. And she says, "Isn't it the truth that you want to escape the pain?" Yes. She told me to say that to myself every time I had one of those thoughts. Say to yourself, "I don't want to die, I just want to escape the pain." And the last is no shame. I hid during my entire chronic depression, and I still hide to this day when I go back into a depression. And after I was hospitalized, it was such a blow to my self-confidence. Kylee Wiscombe went to the mental hospital. I called it bipolar jail. My brother turned to me when we were having a family discussion, and he said, "I don't want you to have shame in this." And he was right. I don't have to have shame in this. And what's interesting is once I decided not to have shame in it, once I started speaking about it, other people stopped having shame in theirs too. Other people started getting help and messaging me and saying, "Thank you for being so open with where you're at in your life. It's helped me to reach out and get help." So I don't want any of you guys to have shame. Happiness has nothing to do with your life circumstances. It's based on your ability to accept the things you are experiencing. I accept that I'm bipolar. Sometimes I try to fight against it, and it's so terrible because I try to just fight with it. But once you accept where you're at, no matter what your circumstances are, whether it's you have a mental illness or the job that you're in or whatever, once you accept those circumstances, and then if you don't like it, change something. Thank you.